Well, we're coming to the home stretch now. We are on our step 7, problem solving, when thinking about our thinking perspective. I'm going to take you back to our leadership model, and we think about those 3 different competencies of the leadership model. And this is really how everyone solves problems. All problems have these 3 different perspectives to them. The relational proficiency, how you connect and get along with others, the operational competency, which has to do with building your team and solving the practical operations of the day, and then the strategic legacy, which has to do with strategy, customers, thinking forward. And just stop for a second and reflect for yourself. Can you think of any problem that has a component other than those 3? You know, everything really boils down to being able to relate to people, solve practical problems, and think for the future. And so today, as we start thinking about our thinking style and how we solve problems from a thinking perspective, we're going to be connecting the leadership model to your assessment report. So, I want to just, when we think about the mantra of Blueprint Leadership and connecting that to the leadership model, we simplify everything by just using 3 words. We say, we want to connect, which is relational proficiency. We want to serve, which is our operational excellence. And we want to impact, which is our strategic legacy. And so as we think forward, I like things in simple form. I tend to like to take anything that's complex or anywhere near complex. I can't handle it in my mind. I like to simplify it down to the simplest component. And so when we think about the mantra, I think that's the simplest way, the simplest components as in terms of how leaders lead and also how people think about solving problems. So before we get started and launched into problem solving, I would like you to do an exercise. So pull down the handout that says mission. And I want you to go ahead and you can listen first and then get the handout. I want you just to think about, for your role, what are the 3 to 5 key deliverables that you need to contribute into the organization in order for your team or your organization as a whole to accomplish its mission. So if you think back, if you're going to communicate to a friend of yours, what are the 3 to 5 most important things that you need to get done? This is a higher level. These are, even higher than, the goals. They're, over the course of a whole year, what are the huge deliverables that you have for the organization in order to help the organization accomplish its mission? Okay, so think about it from that perspective. You're telling a friend, here's the 3 to 5 things that I really need to do this year, right? What are they? So I'm going to ask you to print that handout, write your mission, your career mission at the top of the page, and then list the top 3 to 5 things that you need to deliver into the organization. And once you've completed that exercise, then return to the video and we'll keep going. Okay, now that you have that in front of you, let's dig a little bit deeper into this assessment around what is your thinking perspective. And we're going to start by, I want to introduce you to the man who designed this part of the assessment. His name is Robert Hartman. And Robert is really considered to be the father of axiology, which is the technical term for this section that we're going to be talking about today. In fact, Robert Hartman was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1973. There's been over 100 studies that have been done around this piece of the assessment, again called axiology, and validating and determining the reliability of the way that this piece of the assessment is designed in predicting your perspective on problem solving. So I don't want to get too deep into it. You can look up Robert Hartman and axiology if you want to learn more about the design of this instrument. It's actually very interesting and exciting for those people who are high on the theoretical and are interested in those kinds of details. But for most of us, really what you want to know is that this instrument has been highly validated. It's one of the reasons actually that I like this assessment, because it has this component to it that no other assessment that I've ever seen has, in combination with the other pieces that we've already walked through, the other steps of the assessment. And it's highly reliable, highly valid. So Robert Hartman, when he was alive, he actually used this instrument and the theory behind axiology, which is based on values, in his work with some pretty big name companies like AT&T, General Electric, General Foods, and also IBM. So I just want to give you a little introduction to Robert Hartman and as the designer of this part of the instrument, and the reliability and validity in the studies that have been done around the instrument. So one of the things that I think is really important about thinking style is, you've probably come across this in discussions with people, individuals get kind of married to the ideas that they have. We get emotionally attached to the ways that we think. And so just like with DISC, and there can be conflicts in terms of conflicts in the different styles or in the driving forces, where you can have not as much conflict necessarily as, although that does happen, but just the differences that people bring, that you can be either apathetic to someone's message or really engaged in that message. Well, similarly with thinking styles, people process how they solve problems in different ways. And sometimes we can miss each other in communication because we're thinking from different perspectives. It's kind of like that old saying about the person who gets in a car accident. People are sitting on different corners, and so they see different things because they're seeing from a different perspective. And so each of them has a different reality based on their perspective. And thinking style works that way as well. We can have different perspectives and all be correct in what we see. It depends on what orientation we're taking toward problem solving. So the point here is just to be aware of, when you have a strong opinion about something, to utilize what we're going to be talking about today to think about whether or not people might be just having a different perspective rather than a difference of opinion. Those are two different things. I'll leave you to think about that for a little bit. And then let's move on now and talk about, what is this axiology? What is this theory of value? So what Robert Hartman did was he looked at values that people have around ideas, things, and people. So this is different than your moral compass values. He's really looking at, how do you assess worth to things? And the worth that you attach to things, in Robert's terminology, he calls that a value. But the worth that you attach to something, you then will pay more attention to it because you see it as being worthy of having, value. So let me give you an analogy. It's like if you have a $1 bill, a $5 bill, and a $10 bill. Obviously, the worth of the $10 bill is greater, so it has more value. In the same way, we can look at ideas, people, things, and we attach worth to it. the more worth that we attach to it, the more we'll pay attention to it. The more we pay attention to it, the better that we get at it. And so this is the theory behind axiology, is how do you assess worth or value of things, people and ideas, and then how do you solve problems as a result of the perspective you take around that worth. Now this will make more sense as we continue on, but what I want you to understand here is axiology is based on a valuation of worth around ideas, things, and people. What Robert Hartman discovered is similar to what we talked about when we were talking about beliefs in the earlier section. You know, he realized and through his studies determined that the experiences people have shape their beliefs, and then beliefs shape our decisions. So we already know that. What Robert Hartman adds to it is that the way that we think about things based on our valuation of people, things, and ideas will shape the decisions that we make. And not only that, it will also shape what we pay attention to in terms of skill development. So for example, and this just makes sense, if we value people as our highest priority, then we're going to develop more skills that are conducive to people connection, you know, interpersonal skills, negotiation skills, compassion, you know, those kinds of things that help us because of the value that we place on people. It helped us optimize the importance, the worth of that. Let's say that we value efficiency. Well, as a result, then we're going to develop skills, goal orientation, for example, that will enable us to be more efficient. So the one thing I want you to remember about this is that the way that we attribute worth to ideas, people, and things will then materialize in what we focus on, and we'll develop greater amounts of skill capability based on the things that we value. So let's dive into Robert Hartman's theory of axiology, and then we'll look at the report. So Robert's theory of axiology is really very close to the model that we use for Blueprint's leadership model. And so he has discerned that there's 3 types of thinking styles. There's the first style is the strategic style in the axiology terms. It's strategic legacy for us. And basically that's everything to do with the futuristic conceptual planning kinds of skills that people need. It included in that is ideas. Anything that has to do with strategy then falls into this bucket. And if you think about it, I'm going to use an analogy of building a house. So the strategic piece of building a house would be the architecture. It's the design. There's nothing physical or material there. It's just a concept. And so that's the kind of that's an example of the kind of strategic thinking that we're talking about here. And then the second is operational. So in our model, it's the things that we talked about around operational excellence. And it has to do with anything that's practical, it's doing, it's functional, it's in the everyday, it's tangible, you can touch it. And so in building a house, the example that we would use is anything to do with the building materials. You know, when you're the sheetrock, the rooms, you know, the things, anything that you can touch around building the house, anything that has to do with the construction of the house would be considered this practical or operational type of thinking. Then the third has to do with relational. So anything to do with people. It has to do with the uniqueness of people, anything relational, anything that has to do with intimacy of any sort or caring for people. It's the uniqueness of people's especially is included in this dimension of thinking. And so if you think about building a house, people are building a house for someone. It's understanding that customer and what are the customer's likes and needs and wants in building that house. It's very unique and specialized and specific to the person or the family that it's being built for. And all that would fall then into the relational side of or perspective of thinking. Just to really drive this home, let's take another example or two in the differentiation of these three thinking perspectives. So we already talked about the house. Let's go to the very bottom one on this sheet, and you look at the currency or money, right? So when we think about systematically, money is a currency that's traded globally. And so the whole world right now, actually, like never before in history, is part of a system where if something happens in another country, good or bad, it can impact the United States as well, or whatever country you're in. So the sense of global currency, the systemization of economics across the world, fits in that perspective of strategic orientation. The second practical is, you take cash to a store, a credit card to the store, and you purchase something. So that transaction would be the operational piece, the operational thinking perspective. And then when you purchase something, whether it's for yourself or for someone else, you're purchasing that with a unique person in mind or unique people in mind. And so that becomes the relational perspective of that transaction. Okay, let's take one more example, a meal. Hopefully I won't make you too hungry on this one. So for a meal, the systems perspective would be something like creating your grocery list, right? It's because you're planning, it's conceptual, there's not something tangible. The paper's tangible, but the ideas, the things that you need, it's a conceptual thought that you're writing down. Then operationally, in creating a meal, it's the cooking and the baking that goes into it. It's the tangible things that you need to do in order for you to create that meal. And the relational perspective is you're feeding, let's say, your family. And so you've taken into consideration the things that people like to eat, what brings them joy, what brings them satisfaction, in order to create that meal and an experience for the people that you love, which would be the relational perspective. So hopefully these examples have helped to differentiate between the three ways of thinking, the three thinking perspectives. Now what I'd like you to do is open up your report. So pause the video here, and we're going to just walk through this section of the report and dive into your specific thinking style. All right, you have your report in front of you, and I'm going to walk you through page by page in understanding the information that's here. Now, I'm going to stay at a pretty high overview. There's going to be some detail in the pages that some of you are going to ask, have questions. But I want you to get out the most important things. There's a lot of information here, and I want to highlight the most important things. So I'm going to try and stay as high level as possible. But I want to encourage you to continue to interact with us. So, we're available on all of the social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, of course our website. And so we invite you to continue to interact with us as we grow the strengths that you have and optimize your leadership capability. Let's turn now, I want you to find in your report the page that says Introduction, Acumen Indicators section. And on this page, while you're looking for it, on this page there's some bullet points that talk about the following pages. So that's all that's on the first page, and we're going to turn to the next page and start our journey through the pages of your report for you to be able to gain as much insight as possible about your thinking perspective. So first page after the intro is Summary of Acumen Capacity. So what this page does is it's actually looking at those three different perspectives that we talked about just a few minutes ago. And in the blue line on your page is how well do you understand from all perspectives, what's your capability along those three perspectives in terms of these categories of well-developed, developed, or needs development. So in the blue, what you wanted to see is from right here on this page, and we'll get deeper later, but right now all I want you to see is when I look at my blue line, am I primarily in the well-developed, the developed, or the needs development section in terms of my capability to solve problems? The red line, which is almost always lower than the blue line, is how much capability do I have to solve internal problems that have to do with me, my self-awareness about myself, my roles, my future, my talents, those kinds of things, right? So again, for this page, all I want you to do is see, am I in the well-developed, developed, or needs development sections for my internal acumen capability, right? The next page is your worldview. And in this, what you're going to see is based on how you responded to the assessment, it's going to give you general characteristics about your worldview, your thinking capacity and capability and perspective, based, again, on how you completed the assessment. So this is an indication, it's beginning to give you an indication of how you value ideas, people, and things. The next page, by the way, that last page is a reflection of the blue bar in your acumen capacity. The next page, self-view, is associated with the red bar on your acumen capacity. And again, it's general characteristics based on how you completed the assessment in terms of how you view people, things, and ideas. And so you'll read through each of those bullet points to get the general characteristics of your thinking style. The next page is clarity of performance and situational awareness. So on this page, the important thing to get out of it is the first half of this page is looking at your external views, your worldview. And it's saying, how similar are your thinking perspectives across systems, operational and relational? If they're very balanced, you're going to have high clarity. If you have ups and downs, that some of your dimensions thinking perspectives are very high and others are less high, then you may have more of a needs clarity. So it has to do with the balance of the proportions across all three of those thinking styles. Then external situational awareness is a measure of how accurate is your sense of reality. And let me give you an example of reality. So for me personally, mine needs some development because I tend to think ideally about the world. I tend to think that the world should operate much more effectively, efficiently, smartly than it does. And so I'm not seeing the world with realism. There are people that are, the opposite from me, that, just think that everything's going to be horrific all the time, and they think that nothing ever will get done, and that the world just works and operates slowly. And so they also, even though they're opposite, they actually would also have the same kind of need to develop a better sense of reality. So the people who are well developed are people who see with accuracy how the world operates, and their lens is clear. They don't have a distortion in what the reality should be versus what it is, or how I see it versus what it really is. Okay, the next page, clarity of performance and situational awareness, is, similar concepts to the last one, but this is about how you see yourself. So, in your red line on the acumen page, if they're all even across, then you'll have a higher sense of clarity. If you have the ups and downs with some perspectives taking a lot being a lot higher capacity than others, then you'll have less clarity in this. And then finally, with the internal situational awareness, that again is how much reality do you have in terms of how you see yourself. The more that you see yourself as realistically, the higher your clarity. The more that you overstate or understate your capacity, your roles, your future orientation, your own talents and abilities, then the more you'll have this needs development perspective. Now, let me just say one thing about that needs development. It can be, again, needs development under, your sense of reality, your awareness of reality. It could be that you have, let's take responsibility as an example. It could mean, if you had a needs development, it could mean for under responsibility as like, well, you are under responsible. So in reality, you should take more ownership. But it can mean the opposite as well, that you're over responsible, that you take on too much responsibility. And so you have a needs development as well because of the over responsibility, that you're not in line with reality. I hope that makes sense. Now let's go, and now we're going to start to dive a little bit deeper. On the next page, you're looking at summary of capacity for problem solving. So let's look at, this is similar to the acumen, but a deeper level. So on this page, what again, I want you to be aware of, the blue line is your worldview, and which category are you falling into, well-developed, developed, or needs development. Red line is your self-view, same concept, well-developed, developed, or needs development. And then let's look at the top category for the first time. In the very top section, it talks about the first column is individual situations. And what that is referring to, and you can write right into your report, that's relational proficiency. So the blue line is talking about how well can you connect with others and read them, and it's similar to emotional intelligence in being able to understand others. And then the red line is emotional intelligence with regard to yourself. How well do you discern your own talents and abilities with a sense of accuracy? Okay. The second column, complex situations, is equivalent to our operational excellence. So what's your capacity? Blue line is in the external world for solving practical problems, and the red is for internally being able to solve practical problems, especially with regard to roles that you have and discerning the roles and the conflicts between roles. What's your capacity for that dimension? The third column is called theoretical and normative situations. This is axiology language. It's the same thing as our strategic legacy. So the blue line is about how well can you think out into the future, conceptualize, plan, think forward, anticipate customer needs. Those kinds of things would be the blue line. And the red line is more about how do you think about your future. What's your vision for your career 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now? And what are you doing to position yourself to be able to manifest the dreams that you have for your career or for any other area on the wheel of life for yourself? Okay. That would be the red one under under theoretical and normative situations. Then the problem and decision index is what I talked about before, and that's how balanced are you. All the blues are similar. That will give you a high level of problem and decision index. If all of your blue dots are kind of scattered, then you're going to fall lower in the grid. And the same with the red. The more aligned they are, the more that you move toward the well-developed, and the less balanced they are, the more you move to needs development. I'm going to skip reaction index on this page because we're going to be coming to that in just a few minutes, and we'll go deeper on it. Okay, next page. capacity for problem solving. So here, instead of just having the dot on the page, this gives you a deeper dive into where you are versus where is the population in terms of these thinking dimensions. Okay, so the first one is capacity for problem solving involving people. Just right next to that, relational proficiency. And so the blue line is your score, and you'll see off to the right is your exact score. The red boat there is once the mean is listed is a number, and so the mean for problem solving involving people is 8.6. And then the red boat is 1 standard deviation on each side of the mean. So what it allows you to do is identify, are you above or below the mean with regard to your relational proficiency capability. Then the next capacity for problem solving practical problems is operational excellence. And again, your score in blue with the numerical score off to the right column. The red boat is the population with the number right below being the mean. The third capacity for solving theoretical problems, obviously that's our strategic legacy. Your blue score, population red. And then finally, the last is the capacity for problem solving and decision making in the outside world. And this is a combination. So in the balance of the three perspectives, thinking perspectives, then what is your score and what is the mean of the population? Same for the next page, but this is the internal. So here, you're going to be, I won't go through all of that again. The internal problem solving ability, that's your self-awareness, understanding your own talents, abilities, those kinds of things, and being realistic about it. So that's the first one. The second one is problem solving within one's roles. So this is your ability to discern what the expectations of each of your roles are. You know, for example, I'm a mother, I'm a spouse, I have a role in my work, I'm a child of my parents, I serve in certain ways within the community. All of those are roles that you have, and so it's your capacity to understand the roles, to discern those roles, and to be able to navigate among those roles. The next one, problem solving regarding one's future. We talked about this again. It's futuristic. What's your image for each of the 8 components of the wheel? And how do you compare to the general population, which is that red boat underneath? And then the last one, capacity for problem solving and decision making within oneself. Again, that is a combination of the 3 thinking perspectives we just talked about, and how balanced are they. You can see your score versus the mean of the population. Right, reaction index. I love this one actually, because the reaction index is talking about what's your ability to respond to a situation versus react. And I think most of you know what I mean by that. But let's just talk again and remind ourselves that there's 2 different parts of our brains, right? The cognitive, which is the frontal cortex of our brain, and then there's the old brain, which is called the amygdala or the limbic system. So when we get triggered by something, the limbic system activates. And it really can, when we're under a stressful situation or a difficult situation, the limbic system can take over. It's the, fight or flight kind of situation. And that limbic system can take over and actually shut down the frontal cortex of our brains, right? So this is why somebody will, do something like, most of us have been in a situation where we'll get an email message and we get, triggered, and we say to ourselves, I'm going to just send this, email back out. And sometimes we catch ourselves, but there's that occasional time where we don't catch ourselves and we send something that we later regret, right? And we actually end up escalating a situation. Well, that escalation, that decision to send something that we probably shouldn't have done, that is called being reactive, right? And so we all have those moments. And what the reactive index does is it gives us an indication of where do we fall relative to the population in our reactivity versus responding would be staying in that cognitive frontal cortex of our brain and solving problems less emotionally triggered. So the first section here on the reaction index is measuring your external control. So when something happens in the external world, for example, you're working on an experiment and something happens where a part of your experiment gets destroyed for some reason, right? So that would be an external reaction. How well do you handle that kind of situation? Do you react or do you respond? The second is internal, and this is where most people have a lower score. And the internal control is when something happens that affects you personally. So it may be somebody criticizes something that's important to you, or somebody makes a judgment about someone that you love. Those kinds of things can trigger an emotional response. And again, you'll see where do you score relative to the population. Your score is always on the top. The red boat on the bottom is always the population, with the little white mark in the middle as being the mean of the population. So you want to see, are you within one standard deviation, which is in the mainstream, or are you below, or are you above the one standard deviation, 68% of the population? Now let's turn to dimensional balance page. And I would actually recommend that you take a 10-minute break here. We're going to dive deep into the dimensional balance, and it will help to make sense of the pages that we have just gone through. But it's a lot of information. It's like a fire hose. So my recommendation, though you don't have to do it, would be to take a 10-minute break here and then come back to restart the video, and then we'll take a deeper dive, a plunge into your thinking perspectives externally and internally based on this next page. Okay, hopefully you took a break, because we're going to dive into the dimensional balance page now. It's got a lot of rich information here, but it is also a lot of information. Again, I'm going to try my best to keep it as high level as possible as we move through this part of the report. So the first thing that I want you to be aware of is there are two numbers at the bottom of the page. It's called Rev. The first number is looking at the reliability of your external scores. This is going to make sense in a minute. And then the second number is the reliability of your internal scores. So you have to be at 0.7 or above in order for your report to be valid. If you're not at above 0.7 on the external the external factors, those are the first three bars, then put a big X across those three bars. They're not valid when we can't make conclusions based on it. If this second number at the bottom of the page is less than 0.70, then make a big X across the internal factors, the last three bars of your report. Because again, we won't be able to make conclusions since your report is not valid. Okay. Now let me walk you through how you read the report. Okay, now let's look at the 6 bars. The first 3 bars are external factors. That's the worldview we've been talking about. And then the second 3 bars is the internal factors, and that's the red bar we've been talking about in prior pages. So as you look at the external factors, the green is, in our leadership model, that is the same as the relational proficiency. The yellow is all the terminology we've used around operational excellence. The blue is everything we say about strategic legacy. Those are the measures of those three perspectives. I'm going to come back to how to read that in a second. On the internal factors, it's similar, internal to you. So the relational proficiency is, again, about how you see your talents, abilities, etc., how accurately. The yellow is around roles that you have and discerning those roles. And the blue is your sense of the future and how you see your future, what kind of discipline you have about getting to that future, and thinking about what you need to do to plan for your future. I'm going to go through each one of those in a little bit more detail in just a minute, but those high level, that's what each one of those is representing. So the more fluid that you have, color, in your balanced capability, the higher, obviously, is your capability in that area. You'll see that there is an asterisk on the bar. Where that asterisk is the mean of the population for that particular capability. So you just want to see, are you above or below the mean in that bar? And you have already seen similar measures in the prior pages. Okay. So the first thing that I would like you to do is just look at which of those bars for the external factors is your highest bar. So many of you will have ties, many of you will be balanced, but if you have differentiation between the bars, it's important to understand that you have a capability in one or two of the bars that is higher than your capability in one or the other of the bars. So just get a sense of where is your strongest capability, or is it balanced across those bars? And the same on the internal side. Do you have capability in one or more bars that exceeds that of the others, or is it balanced across all three of the bars? Okay. We see that there's a differentiation immeasurably if you are 0.04, if there's a 0.04 differentiation between those bars. Now let's look at each of the bars individually. The first bar is the green one, as I said earlier, is really a measure of what is your emotional intelligence in reading other people. So it's your sense of building relationships, in empathizing, in your sensitivity to other people, in your ability to listen to people, seeing people for their uniqueness, being able to discern their talents, their gifts, their abilities, their needs, their wants as unique individuals. Okay? The higher your green fluid, the more effectively you do that. Right? The indicator, whether it's an up arrow, down arrow, or a neutral, is indicative of your bias. So in the green bar, if you have a bias up, that means that you tend to overstate the importance of relationships in your decision making. If the arrow is down, that means that you underestimate the relational perspective in decision making and taking action. And if it's a circle, then you're neutral, you're objective in that capacity. Okay. The yellow, as we said, is operational excellence, and the operational excellence has to do with the tangibles, the observables, comparisons of one thing to another. It has its things, its events, social norms, the functionality, understanding the functionality of things, understanding departments and how departments function together and separately. It's allocation of resources and materials and understanding budgeting around those things. It has to do with the ability to be efficient and communication that goes out at a practical level to get people aligned and doing things together. So the yellow bar then is, again, operational excellence. What's your capacity? And then The arrow, the bias, is indicated by an upward bias would be that you overemphasize the importance of these things, and that you tend to be a person who really will be able to dig down deep into the core problems and determine what the root causes of things are. Neutral's neutral, and then if you have an arrow down, that's a person who, regardless of how much capacity you have in that, you have a bias against that kind of thinking. So it would be your preference that someone else go and investigate the details and the root causes of things and then bring that information to you, as opposed to you being involved in that deeper root cause analysis. The blue bar is our strategic legacy. And so some of the components of the blue bar is, like I said, big picture thinking, being strategic. It has everything to do with conceptual, non-tangible things like ideas and words, anything to do with thinking and planning. It has to do with ideals and aspirations, any kind of mental model or concept, anything that is like, you're getting the picture here, is anything that's conceptual. You can't touch it. It doesn't have to do with people, which is relational. You can't touch it, which is operational. It's conceptual. It's ideas. It's futuristic. Those things fall under this column. So the higher your bar is there, the more capability you have in that dimension of thinking. If you have an arrow up, that's a bias toward believing that you can put a system in place that is going to solve problems, which is over-exaggerated. Systems don't solve all problems. And so if you have an arrow up, you are biased toward thinking that systems are going to be the answer. And neutral is neutral. If you have an arrow down here, then it's an indication that you tend to prefer not to have a lot of systems. You'd prefer to have a much more openness in terms of concepts and models and thinking and future opportunities. So that covers the first three bars in external thinking, both capability and then bias. So let's turn now to the internal side, looking at those three bars. The first bar is green again, and it has to do with, I think of it in simple terms. It's relational proficiencies again, but in terms of how you see yourself. So it's your own sense of worth and uniqueness, being able to understand what your talents are and are not, understanding, it's more of like a spiritual understanding of yourself in not necessarily in a faith way, but spiritually. Who are you? What's your worth? What's your dignity? What's your confidence level? And knowing what you're good and not so good at. Again, an arrow up would be an indicator of someone who believes, well, I really know myself and I'm pretty great and there's not a lot of room for me to grow. I'm pretty wired up. And then the neutral is just that. And a downward arrow is a person that is recognizes I'm not perfect. I'm coachable. I have room to grow, and I want to learn more in order to be more effective. So majority of time we see people who are neutral or down arrow in this dimension, the green arrow on the internals. The yellow has to do with, like I said, role discernment, and it's about how fulfilled are you in your role? Do you understand the expectations of your role? Is there harmony in your roles? Do you have clarity about what's expected of you within your different roles? And then a personal satisfaction of your roles. So the up arrow is, I am thrilled with the roles that I have right now. And I'm very satisfied with the equilibrium between those roles. A down arrow would be someone who's got some dissatisfaction in one or more of the roles. And obviously the circle is objective, not biased in either direction. The blue on the internal has to do with self-direction. So it's about vision and strategy for yourself and your future. It's understanding your identity in your calling, in your identity in your destiny, moving forward. It's also about your ability to organize and be directed with some sense of motivation for the future. And it's really about seeing yourself in unity. It's your career, but every other opportunity, every other of the components along the wheel of life, that you see what you want for yourself at some future date, and you have the discipline and the organization to take steps to make that happen. So an up arrow here is a person who has this drive. It's an indicator of drive for and passion for the future. Neutral's neutral, and an arrow down is an indication that there's not a sense of drive right now. And that's not necessarily a negative. Sometimes people are just in a stage of life. Let's say you just got married or you just had a newborn child. So you're not thinking about putting energy and discipline into driving something 5 years from now. If you just had a baby, you're trying to get through the day, sleep a couple of hours, and keep this creature alive for a while, right? So your emphasis is not in the future orientation, and maybe a reason, for example, why you would have a down arrow in the futuristic internal, okay, strategic internal. So that is covering what I wanted to talk about in this particular page. I think I've covered everything. So let's take a break here. I encourage you to just turn the video off, go again at least 10 minutes, take a break, and let some of that absorb into your thinking about your own thinking perspective.